The conference room in Geneva was never meant for drama. It was built for diplomacy, for soft voices and silent deals made behind polished glass and press suits. But today, something different was in the air. Not just tension pressure, not just anticipation electricity. You could feel it the second you walked in. The cameras weren't just watching, they were waiting. Reporters packed the aisles, shoulder to shoulder, notebooks open, fingers twitching above keyboards. They weren't here for policy updates. They were here for something else. They were here for a showdown. At the center of the long table draped in the UN flag sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Polished, poised, sharp as glass. A Texas firebrand with a law degree and a bite to match. To her followers, she was a truth teller. To her critics, a hammer with no off switch. And across from her, a different kind of silence. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. Young, still, and utterly unreadable. No grand gestures. No pre-written talking points. Just a calm stare that unsettled even the most seasoned diplomat. This wasn't supposed to be a headline event. But it was already too late for that. Because when Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her voice crisp through the mic and her words dripping with certainty, the room leaned with her. "You don't understand the game," she said. "We built this system. We set the rules. This is our world, and we expect you to act like you live in it." No one breathed. Across the table, Traoré slowly adjusted the earpiece, pulled it out, and met her eyes. "That's what you think." Just 5 words. Quiet, almost gentle, but they hit the room like thunder inside a library. Journalists stiffened. The moderator blinked. Even Crockett paused, not for long, but long enough for everyone to notice. And Traoré wasn't done. "Where I come from," he continued, "systems don't feed our children. Agreements don't protect our women. And sanctions, they don't build roads. You call it order. We call it survival without you." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. Phones lit up. Editors were already being texted. From Ouagadougou to Nairobi. Live streams ticked upward. This wasn't just a forum anymore. This was a front line. And it was clear now, this wouldn't be a polite exchange of viewpoints. This was going to be a clash of worlds. Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She had sparred with senators, battled on live television, and torn through courtroom cross-examinations like a storm. She wasn't about to be shaken by one calm sentence from a man most of Washington still labeled as unpredictable. She leaned in again, her voice like a scalpel. "So now you're declaring independence from reality," she said, half smirking. "You want to build your world without ours, across the table." Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shift in his seat. He simply answered. His tone so quiet, it demanded silence to be heard. "No, I'm rejecting your illusion of it." The moderator froze, caught between moving the conversation forward or getting out of the way. Because this wasn't diplomacy anymore. It was a duel. And the air felt like it was cracking. Crockett crossed her legs slowly, deliberately. Everything about her posture said control. She was ready to reassert dominance. "You talk about survival," she said, "but we talk about strategy. Without structure. Without partnerships. Countries like yours don't evolve. They collapse. We don't dictate. We stabilize." Traoré, raised an eyebrow, and then he leaned forward. Not to provoke. Topirse. Stability that comes with chains, he said, is just a slower kind of collapse. A hush rippled through the press row. You call it partnership, but we know what it's like to sign agreements. With pens we didn't make. On paper, we didn't own. Under terms, we didn't write. He paused. That's not partnership. That's performance. Somewhere in the back. A journalist muttered, he's not arguing. He's revealing. Crockett's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed even. And yet, she said, your people still accept aid. Traoré's answer came before the echo faded, because hunger doesn't wait for dignity. But that doesn't mean we're blind to the cost. And in that moment, the room changed. No one was checking their phones anymore. No one whispered to aides. The power wasn't where it had started. For the first time, Jasmine Crockett was on her heels. She glanced at her aide in the front row. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. She had come prepared for confrontation, but this wasn't confrontation. This was clarity. She was up against something quieter. More dangereux. Truth. Sharpened, like a knife, without the need to shout. I respect idealism, she said, trying to pivot. But the world runs on realism. Traoré didn't hesitate. No, he said. It runs on fear. And fear is exactly what we're unlearning. The moderator tried again, his voice light, almost pleading. Perhaps we can move to opening statements. Traoré turned slightly. I've made mine, he said. She drew the map. I just erased the borders. Jasmine Crockett sat back slightly. Her smile didn't fade, not yet, but it lost something. A flicker of unease. The kind of shift that only cameras with long lenses could capture. She wasn't just debating a foreign leader. She was losing control of the room. She cleared her throat. Voice clipped and confident. Leadership isn't about slogans or rebellion. It's about results. While your country plays at revolution, we're building real governance. There it was. The jab. And for a second, just a second, it seemed like the crowd might tip back toward her. Until Traoré stood. He didn't raise a fist. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply walked to the edge of the stage just far enough for the spotlight to leave part of his face in shadow. Revolution, he said quietly, is what you call it when we refuse to kneel. The room locked in. When we say no to occupation, disguised as aid. When we build without permission. When we lead without asking how high you want us to jump. Jasmine's fingers tightened around her note cards. Her team had spent weeks scripting every potential line. But this wasn't in the script. And then came the screen. Behind them, the monitor flickered to life. Images rolled solar panels, lighting up a rural village. Young girls in school uniforms reading from textbooks written in local languages. Women running cooperatives. Clinics built from local materials, not foreign steel. Crockett turned. Caught off guard. It wasn't just a slideshow, it was evidence. You want results, Traoré said. Turning back. This is what we're building. Not for applause. Not for headlines. But because no one is coming to save us, so we saved ourselves. Silence. The kind that weighs on the chest. Then, out of nowhere, a young woman stood up. Press badge swinging. Voice trembling. President Traoré, are you saying the Western model is obsolete? He looked at her. And for the first time all evening, he smiled. No. He said, I'm saying it's overdue. For humility. The first clap came from the back. Then another. Soon the room rippled. Not a standing ovation. Not yet. But the kind of applause that feels like a shift. Jasmine Crockett smiled too, but it was different now. Measured. Hollow. She had come to remind the world who was steering the ship, but Traoré, he wasn't trying to take the wheel. He was showing them a different ocean. Jasmine Crockett adjusted her microphone. She'd recovered before on bigger stages, with tougher crowds. But this time, she wasn't wrestling with noise. She was wrestling with silence. The kind of silence that follows a blow, not to the body, but to the story you've built your authority on. Still. She wasn't finished. She straightened her back, composed her voice. Mr. Traoré. She began. Your passion is admirable. But leadership isn't performance, it's policy. Let's talk facts. A subtle nod from her aide. Time to reframe the narrative. The West has invested billions in Africa. Roads. Hospitals. Infrastructure. Are you saying that means nothing? A few heads in the crowd nodded. Subtle support. But Traoré didn't answer right away. He stepped forward. Back into the dim edge of the spotlight. I'm saying, aid without respect, he said slowly, is just declaration on dependence. A murmur ran through the room. Journalists scribbled. Camera crews whispered to producers. Another ripple. Those billions you speak of, he continued, came with conditions. Loans tied to control. Roads that led not to villages, but to your shipping docks. He turned toward the crowd now, no longer just addressing Jasmine. You called it development. But to us, it felt like a leash. Crockett's lips pressed together. Her grip on the podium tightened. Still calm on the outside, but inside, the tempo had changed. She pivoted quickly. And yet, here you are, speaking freely, on an American-funded stage, with full global reach. Doesn't that say something about our openness? Traoré didn't break stride, didn't blink. It says something, he replied, about your optics, about your habit of showcasing disagreement, so long as it doesn't threaten your control. Gasps, audible now. Live stream numbers ticked upward fast. On phones. In newsrooms. On social feeds, the moment was going global. And then it came the question. No one scripted. A reporter from the back stood. Voice a little shaky. President Traoré. What exactly are you offering the world? If not this system, Traoré posed. He looked at the man then beyond him. Into the lens of the main broadcast camera. His voice dropped not in volume, but in gravity. I'm offering nothing, he said. We're not asking for the world's permission. We're asking to be whole. On our terms. That was the line. Not shouted. Not declared, just spoken like a stone being placed gently into water. And the ripples they would reach far. Jasmine Crockett turned slightly in her chair. She didn't speak. Because in that moment, words weren't winning. Presence was. And Ibrahim Traoré, he had stopped debating. He was leading. Jasmine Crockett had had enough. Enough of the slow-building applause. Enough of the rising live stream numbers for him. Enough of being spoken around instead of to. She leaned forward. Eyes locked. Her tone now colder. Clipped. Let me be clear. She said. America is not the villain. Her voice echoed slightly sharp. Pointed. We've led peacekeeping missions. We've fed the hungry. We've built schools, while countries like yours were busy playing revolution instead of governing. A few in the room froze. There it was. The gloves. Off. The moderator blinked, his hands clasped tighter. This had officially crossed the line into confrontation. But Traoré still, like stone, he stood slowly. No rush. No tremble. And when he stepped forward just slightly, the lights caught the edge of his face like a blade. Revolution, he said, is what you call it. When we refused to kneel, the crowd didn't move. They didn't need to. They felt it. When we say no to occupation disguised as aid, when we teach our children with our voices, not your scripts, when we plant what we eat and eat what we grow. Crockett opened her mouth, but nothing came out. And Traoré wasn't done. Governance, he said, isn't a conference word. It's not a funding metric. It's not a camera-friendly press release. He walked slowly to the screen behind him, tapped it once. New images, clean water metrics, maternal health rates, literacy rates all moving upward. But there were no slogans. No branding. No donor logos. Just raw. Local growth. Undeniable. These numbers aren't abstract. He said, they're not tied to elections. They're not tied to aid. They're lives. My people's lives. Not your exports. Not your ballot tests. Lives. Back row journalists stopped typing. Not because they didn't know what to write. Because they did. And for the first time in the entire debate, Jasmine Crockett stood still. Not posed. Not planned. Just still. She had launched her sharpest attack. And it hadn't landed. Not because he dodged, but because he didn't need to. You speak of building schools, he said. But before you laid the bricks, you took our books, rewrote our history, told our children who they were supposed to be before they even had a chance to become. Someone in the back stood and clapped. Alone. Then two. Then four. The applause didn't thunder. It grew. Like something waking up. Crockett looked out into the audience, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if they were still hers. And Traoré, he didn't smile. He didn't bow. He just stood there, unshaken. Jasmine Crockett adjusted her blazer. She wasn't done. She couldn't be. Not after years spent earning this seat. This stage. This moment. But it was no longer hers. Not fully. Not anymore. Still. She stepped forward, shoulders high. Voice steady. If you reject our model, she said, what's your alternative? Rhetoric and rebellion. Traoré turned slowly to face her. And for the first time, there was something in his eyes, not anger, not defiance. Resolve. No, he said. Dignity and design. He walked to the touchscreen behind him again. With a single swipe, a digital map of the Sahel region came to life. We've launched the Dignity Hubs, he said. Solar-powered, community-run energy and food centers. Funded not by foreign debt, but by gold-backed local microcredit. He tapped again. Data bloomed. Access to clean water, maternal health statistics, rural literacy rates, local crop yields. All of them climbing. He turned back to the audience. These aren't ideals. These are results. Not theoretical. Not foreign funded. Ours. Crockett raised an eyebrow. Her last line of defense. That sounds admirable, she said, her tone sharpening. But let's not pretend this is scalable. We're talking about a continent. Traoré didn't flinch. You're confusing scale. With permission. The room went still. We're not asking to be global. We're asking to be whole. There's a difference. Even the moderator lowered his pen. Because this wasn't policy anymore. This was clarity spoken like a blade. Crockett tried again. Pressing on. But regional systems like that require trust. And trust isn't currency. Traoré locked eyes with her. And answered with a voice like quiet thunder. No. But betrayal costs more. It hit like a drum. Not because it was loud, but because it resonated. Crockett opened her mouth, then closed it. Her argument wasn't just unraveling. It had been outgrown. And for the first time since the broadcast began, she didn't speak. The room was silent. But not the kind of silence that demands words. It was the kind that settles in when truth finally arrives. Traoré stood steady. Not victorious. Not boastful. Just present. Unmoved. And the audience. They weren't clapping yet. They weren't standing yet. But something deeper had shifted. Not opinion. Orientation. They weren't watching a debate anymore. They were watching a realignment. And Jasmine Crockett, for all her eloquence, for all her credentials, was no longer driving the narrative. She was chasing it. The applause didn't roar. It rose. Not with frenzy, but with force. It wasn't for a performance. It was for a shift felt more than heard. And Jasmine Crockett, she stood still. Her face composed, but her eyes said it all. She had lost the room. Not by mistake, but by misreading the moment. Backstage, her aides moved quickly, whispering, typing, sending signals to press contacts, reframe the exchange, control the fallout, get ahead of the narrative. But it was too late. Because outside the walls of that Geneva hall, the world was already watching and deciding for itself. Within hours, clips flooded social media. The quote that echoed loudest wasn't loud at all. You're confusing scale with permission. It was everywhere. TikTok edits, Instagram reels, X threads layered with side-by-side maps, subtitles, and music that built like thunder behind Traoré's voice. In Ouagadougou, students gathered in university courtyards to watch the replay on projection screens. Some stood. Some sat in silence. But all of them understood what they were witnessing. Not défiance. Declaration. In South Africa, a student group replaced the mural of a 1,962nd revolutionary icon with a new one, Traoré, standing beneath a solar panel, holding a notebook, surrounded by children. The words beneath it, we're not asking to be global. We're asking to be whole. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the headlines took a sharper tone. Foreign leader outmaneuvers. U.S. representative in Geneva forum. Crockett's misstep becomes global turning point. The man who spoke without permission and was heard anyway. Cable news spun fast. Some hosts tried to downplay it. Traoré is charismatic, but unrealistic. These so-called dignity hubs won't last. America remains the leader of the free world. But online, a different current surged. Hashtags began trending. Number, dignity and design. Number, we walk alone. Number, Burkina rising. Hedidin task built. One comment pinned under a viral video read, "She brought policy. He brought proof." Back in Crockett's office, she scrolled through the coverage, jaw clenched. She wasn't humiliated. She wasn't angry. She was unsettled. Because it wasn't what he said that shook her. It was what she didn't see coming. He hadn't fought her. He'd simply stood there and let truth grow tall. No fire. No fury. Just presence. And that was harder to combat than anything she'd prepared for. And Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't hold a press conference. He didn't gloat. He didn't trendjack the moment. Instead, that night, he walked alone through a rice field outside the capital. No camera crew. No podium. A young boy spotted him and shouted. President Traoré turned and smiled. "You made her look small." The boy said. Traoré shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "I just stopped pretending we are." The boy grinned and ran off into the dusk. Traoré stood there quietly, listening to the wind ripple through the field like applause that didn't need a crowd. A week after the Geneva debate, the world hadn't moved on. It had moved differently. In Addis Ababa, Cairo, and Accra, university halls were packed with students, rewatching every word, Traoré said, pausing. Dissecting. Quoting. In Nigeria, a youth-led podcast declared. This wasn't diplomacy. It was reclamation. And in Ghana, high school teachers rewrote final exam questions, discussed the difference between foreign aid and sovereign design. Meanwhile, in Washington, the fallout deepened. Crockett's office scrambled to reframe. They released a polished video clips of her humanitarian work, her voting record, her years of public service. But the comments told a different story. He came with data. You came with dominance. You told him how the world works. He showed you how it could. We weren't watching a man speak. We were watching a continent rise. No rebuttal could match what had already been felt. Because something had changed. Not the man. The mirror. And the world didn't like what it saw in its own reflection. Across Africa, the momentum wasn't just emotional. It was material. In Mali, a co-op movement launched its first pilot inspired by the Dignity Hubs. In Kenya, university students staged a hackathon called Designing Without Permission. And in Burkina Faso, murals of Traoré began appearing on school walls, not as a president, but as a planter, holding seeds, teaching children, kneeling in soil. Not a hero, a gardener. And yet Traoré wasn't chasing headlines. He was chasing harvests. That afternoon, in a village 2 hours outside Ouagadougou, Traoré stood in a dusty garden, surrounded by children. A little girl, no more than 6, held out a single seed in her palm. "Is this really going to be a tree?" she asked. He crouched, looked her in the eyes. "If you water it, protect it, and believe in it," he said. "Yes, it will be a tree. A strong one." She grinned and dropped the seed into the earth. No press was there. No applause. Just a quiet nod. A beginning. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the red clay hills, Traoré stood alone at the edge of a rice field. He wasn't reflecting on Geneva. He wasn't thinking about Crockett. He was listening. To the wind. To the land. To something deeper than debate. They spoke like they owned the world. He whispered. We answered, like we remembered who we are. Behind him, children ran, seeds buried in warm soil. Ahead of him, a continent, no longer waiting for permission. And somewhere, a headline quietly updated. Ibrahim Traoré not just a voice, a movement. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He built. And now, the question wasn't whether he belonged in their world, it was whether they were ready for the one he was planting.